Hi viewers, welcome to the channel Global English Academy, which aims at teaching English language and literature. In the previous class, I have discussed in detail about what is literature, what is literary criticism, and what is literary theory, and the difference between literary criticism and literary theory. If you haven't seen that video, there is a link in the comment box you can watch. So in this class, I'm going to discuss, Plato and Aristotle as a literary critics. So first we will look at, first we will remember what we have studied about literary criticism. Okay, literary criticism concerns itself with the various problems of literature, as I told you, and it deals with the literature that has been produced, and it deals with the thought content of that literature. And literary criticism seeks to interpret the ideas contained itself. As I told you, it concerns itself with the study of the method and manner of producing that literature. And literary criticism also inquiries into the nature of literature and the problems associated with it. The philosophical inquiry leads to the study of imagination and aesthetics. If we look at literary criticism, it starts with the ancient Greeks. Greek produced great poetry and great drama. The Greek intellectuals took pride in their literature and wanted to make proper assessment of literature. And the Greek poets and dramatists were conscious about their duties and responsibilities. And they both, poets and dramatists, both were for idealistic and realistic approach to life and literature. Thus, you might have heard the name Achilles, who is a famous, tragedian of Greek. He was opinion that literature should be highly imaginative, but whereas Euripides, another tragedian, no, he wanted to it to be based on the real life. However, they all agreed that literature should teach, and they regarded poets as teachers. However, the real literary criticism begin with Plato. Plato was a poet, a philosopher, and a patriot. He was not strictly a literary critic as his disciple Aristotle was. He is primarily concerned with the state and society, and in his Republic discussed the general principle of a good society. Poetry, Plato maintains, has nothing to do with the reality, as he believed that it is only a fictional creation, an imitation of imitation. Plato said that poetry is an imitation of imitation. It deals with the something that is twicely removed from the reality. He says, Plato says it. Plato is an idealistic who takes the world of matter as an imitation of absolute reality. Poets, in their turn, deal with the world of matter. Hence, what they create is an imitation of imitation. And Plato took poets as divinely inspired, but he is not going to allow the poets to corrupt the people with the unreal and fictional creations. Poets should aim at educating the citizens as Plato believed it. Poetry should be an educative and moral agent according to Plato. Poets who do not help the development of human mind on the right line should be banished. Plato said it. Okay. And Plato's importance in literary criticism is due to his theory of imitation and his awareness of social values of art. Finally and eventually, Plato said that poetry is far removed from truth and it feeds the inferiority part of soul. Poetry should be judged by the standards of ideal state. So, moreover, Plato believed that poetry is nothing but imitation of imitation, and these poets, they are filled, their works are filled with idealistic or imaginative qualities. So these poets are these poets are not living in the reality, as Plato believed that. And here, Sydney Plato's, Sydney, he opinioned about Plato that of all philosophers, I have estimated him most worthy of reverence, and with a great reason, since all the philosophers he is most poetical. See, so these are the words of Sydney about the Plato. Sydney observed that if we compare to the philosophers of Western, Plato was most important, most worthy one. He was the man or the philosopher of worthy reverence. He has a great reason, according to Sydney. Plato's view of art is art copies of copy, and hence it is twice removed from the reality, as Plato said. Art produces or imitates the physical world, that is the mimesis. So images of art are copies of copies. The core Platonic thought resides in Plato's doctrine of essence, ideas, and ultimate reality. So, Plato states his spiritual dilemma, what he calls the one. See, in the material world, we can, therefore recognize a chair as a chair because the idea of a chair exists in this spiritual dilemma and produced that existence of material chair without the existence of ideal chair, the physical chair, which is nothing more than the shadow or the representation or imitation or a reflection of ideal chair, could not exist. See, here Plato's main concern is if we recognize, if we imagine it, the chair, material chair that is exist in the material world, no, the chair that is because of ideal chair that exist in the human mind, no, first this concept of chair exists in the human mind, then it is going to exist in this material world. If there is no the ideal chair in the human mind, there is no representation, there is no importance given to the physical chair that is there in the material world. Here the idea of a chair that is exist in the human mind at first is more important according to Plato. If the concept of chair that is exist in the human mind is not there is no importance given to it, no, so this material chair that is exist in this material world is may not be given importance to it. This is what Plato said. According to Plato and his followers, poets are merely imitating an imitation when they write about any object in the material world. See, according to Plato and his fellow followers, no, poets are merely imitators. They just imitate the world, physical world. whatever they wrote about the any object in the world, no, in the material world, it's just an imitation. In the Republic, Plato concludes that the poet must be banished from Greek society. See, finally he concludes that poets must be vanished from the Greek society or the ideal society of Greek. So, moreover, Plato said art is or the poetry is useless. There is no use from the poetry according to Plato. There is no use from the poetry about to society according to Plato. And art is potentially dangerous. See, Plato believed that art is dangerous because it is going to talk about the false things that are not exist in this material world. Plato's main concern is about material world, the reality, real world. But these poets usually imitate the material or the real world, according to Plato, right? So this is what Plato's view about poetry or art. Then we have Aristotle. Plato's disciple Aristotle replies to the charges of Plato against poetry. In reality, later criticism begins systematically with Aristotle. If we look at the Greek literature, no, if we look at literary criticism, Plato was the first, literary critic. If we look at literary criticism point of view, in reality, literary criticism, as I told you, begin with Aristotle. His poetics is the famous work that has been written by Aristotle. In his poetics, he had tremendously influence on the continental criticism, especially during the Renaissance and 18th century literature. Aristotle accepted the theory of imitation as his guru, as his teacher propagated, and along with the imitation, Plato adds that poetry is not merely an imitation but also a creation. Secondly, Plato maintains that the effects of poetry are really hygienic and creative in mind. Aristotle puts poetry to a higher position than history for poetry because poetry tends to express the universal history. Okay, and here Plato, says that poetry is more superior compared to history. History tells the fact, as I told you in the last class, but poetry expresses the universal history. Aristotle, in his Poetics, examines in detail about the nature and kinds of poetry. Opposing Plato's ideas, he shows that poetry is true, serious, and useful. Whereas Plato says poetry is useless, but here Aristotle says poetry is useful, and it's serious. The kinds of poetry are distinguished by their medium, subject of matter, and technique. There are two kinds of poetry according to Aristotle. That is, one is epic and another one is tragedy. See, if we look at Aristotle poetics, no, he mostly talk about his talk is more on tragedy. According to Aristotle, tragedy must have six parts. What are those six components? What are those? Plot, character, diction, thought, melody, and spectacle. Of these, the plot is significant. significant one, greatest one, because the plot is not only merely a story, it's the soul of a tragedy. Remember this. According to Aristotle, plot is the soul of tragedy, for which every other things emerge. Because of this plot, no other components of tragedy will emerge. The plot, the plot must have a unity. It must have beginning, middle, and end. However, it may be a simple or complex. Character is a second importance given to the tragedy according to Aristotle, while thought comes next after thought comes. Character must be true to life according to Aristotle. It must have its good points and drawbacks. Character is not required in a tragedy. Similarly, an absolute villain cannot be the hero of tragedy. See, according to Aristotle, tragedy must have character. If you look at the protagonist of the Aristotle tragedy, Aristotle's concept of tragedy, the hero or the protagonist of the drama should be a noble man. Noble, he should come from noble family. He must have his own good qualities. The protagonist, he must have his own good qualities. Along with good qualities, he must have his own drawbacks, good and evil. Okay. Similarly, an absolute villain cannot be a hero of the tragedy. See, according to Aristotle, the tragic hero is should be absolutely good person, good character. He must not be a villain. Villain cannot be a hero of the tragedy according to Aristotle. Okay. Aristotle also seeks to find out the reasons of greatness of tragedy. Why tragedy is so great according to Aristotle. If we compare to other forms of literature, no, tragedy is most important according to Aristotle. Because tragedy he feels that produces a healthful effects on the human mind through the catharsis. Here, catharsis means purifications or the purifications of emotions and feelings. See, if we look at the tragedy, at the end of the tragedy, we are going to purify our own emotions and feelings about the main character, or that is the protagonist. We feel pleased towards the main character. That is what Aristotle says about catharsis. Through the pity and fear effecting the proper purgation of these emotions. Thus, Aristotle refutes Plato's charge that poetry corrupts the human mind. He totally rejected. Okay, so Aristotle, reject that the Plato's belief about the nature of reality, and this poetics, composed 26 small chapters, and it's an incomplete work, and it is going to focus more on, as I told you, tragedy, and it distinguished tragedy and epic, right? And it comments on plot and character. Aristotle sees that epic poetry, tragedy, comedy, poetry, and music are alike in that they all imitate. See, according to Aristotle, epic poetry, tragedy, comedy, poetry, music all are same. They all imitate the human life, but they differ in medium, objects, and manner of imitation. See, if we look at epic poetry, and its manner of imitation of human life is different compared to poetry. If we look at a tragedy, The medium of tragedy or the objectives of tragedy is totally different compared to poetry. The manner of imitation by the tragedy about the human life is totally different. Aristotle says it, but he maintains that good art is neither useless nor dangerous, but natural and beneficial one. See, according to Aristotle, art is useful and beneficial to the society, but it may be useful or dangerous, but beneficial one. Art is very beneficial to the human life, human society. It is the historians, not the poets, who writes of what has already happened, but poets write what could happen. Therefore, poetry is more philosophical than the history. See, Aristotle says that it is not poets; it's historians. They writes what has already happened in the society, but poets, they were going to write what could happen, what will happen, what could happen in the human society. Therefore, Plato believed that poetry is more philosophical than the history. See, his guru, his teacher, Plato's teacher, sorry, Aristotle teacher, that is the Plato, said that art is useless. But here, Aristotle says that art is useful. And according to Aristotle, art is not useless, it's natural for human beings to imitate since it is an intellectual activity to any human being. See, writing, poetry, writing and art, no, according to Aristotle, is an intellectual activity and it is natural to human beings to imitate. We should imitate the things. When we are going to imitate the society is going to improve. When we are going to imitate the person through the work of art, no, he is going to improve himself or herself. Okay, so this is what Aristotle said. Poet society which is healthy will be a society where there is an imitative art. See, if we have healthy society, good society, that is because of imitative art. If art imitate the society, no, the society will be healthy one, good one, ideal one. That is what Aristotle said. Okay. And Plato said that art is dangerous, deceptive. But here Aristotle said art is not deceptive one. Artists portray according to reality, must be accurately, successfully in drama. Drama is convincing and powerful because it reveals truth of human nature. See, if we look at Aristotle opinion, drama, it is going to convince or more powerful. It is going to convince the human life. It is going to tell about the truth of human nature, what human is, how human should live his life in the healthy society. So, for example, Sophocles' Oedipus Rex is the correct and the greatest tragedy according to Plato. And this Oedipus Rex, it has all the principle of tragedy as Aristotle propagated it. Aristotle's definition of tragedy is, he says that tragedy is an imitation of action. See, tragedy is an imitation of action. Tragedy must imitate the action that is serious. If a tragedy is going to imitate the action, no, the action should be serious and it should be a complete one and of a certain magnitude in a language, embellished with each kind of artist ornament. The several kinds being found in separate parts of the play, in the form of action, not of narrative, through pity, and fear, affecting the proper purgation of these emotions. See, Aristotle says that tragedy is an imitation of action, and that action should be serious and complete one, and it has some magnitude, and it has some style of writing, it has some style of language expression, the way how we are going to express this society, the drama is going to express the human life, tells about the human life. And a drama should have some ornaments like a literary device, chorus, use of language, use of dialogues in the drama, especially in the tragedy. There must be pity and fear, according to Aristotle. In tragedy, in tragedy, there must be pity and fear, according to Aristotle, because it is going to affect the proper purgation of these emotions and feelings. See, when we look at a tragedy, at the end of the tragedy, the main character is going to die and is going to realize his true life. When the protagonist is going to realize his true life, we audience, when we audience, we are going to realize, we are going to pleased, we are going to pleased about the main character, that is the protagonist, right? And according to Aristotle, as I told you, there are six components of tragedy. What are those? Plot, character, and thought, diction, song, spectacle, catharsis, and hamartia. Hamartia is the tragic flaw of a main character. See, if you look at Sophocles, Oedipus Rex, no, at the end of the tragedy, Sophocles tragedy, Oedipus, that is the Oedipus, no, we there we can find the flaw, the flaw of main character, that is the Oedipus. He lost his eyes. He lost his eyes because he killed his own father and married his own mother. That is because of that fate, no, when he come to know he married his own mother, no, that is the Oedipus. He removes his eyes. That is the realization, that is the tragic flaw of main character, right? And this is all about Aristotle and Plato as a literary critics. In the next class, I'm going to talk about some other important literary critics of classical literature. Okay, thank you for watching this video. Have a nice day.